I still remember the moment everything changed. The moment when 6 years of sacrifice, exhaustion, and unconditional love came down to a single manila envelope resting on the polished wood of my lawyer's table. Across the courtroom, my soon-to-be ex-husband, Drive, Alex Pierce, smirked at his attorney, radiating the supreme confidence of a man who had never lost at anything. He had no idea that his entire world, the world I had single-handedly built for him, was contained within that simple paper folder. He thought he was divorcing a waitress. He was about to find out he was divorcing his primary investor. Our story began, as many do, under the fluorescent lights of a university library. I was a sophomore studying art history, and he was a first-year medical student with eyes that held the entire universe and a debt that could eclipse it. We fell in love quickly, catastrophically. Our future was a canvas we painted together over cheap coffee and instant noodles. He would become a brilliant surgeon, I would curate a museum, and we would build a life so beautiful it would make the angels weep. But med school tuition was a monster, and his part-time lab job barely covered his books. It was then that I made the first of many sacrifices, a decision that seemed so small and noble at the time, but would shape the entire trajectory of my life. "It's just temporary, Grace," he had promised, his hand over mine in our tiny, cramped apartment, "just until I get my residency. Then, you'll go back. You can get your master's, your PhD, anything you want. I'll pay for it all." I swear, I believed him with every fiber of my being. So I dropped out of college. I traded my textbooks for an apron, my lectures for the clatter of ceramic plates, and my dreams for his. I picked up a second job bartending on weekends, and then a third, cleaning offices in the pre-dawn hours when the city was still asleep. Every dollar, every ounce of my energy was funneled into his education. I paid his tuition, I bought his groceries, I typed his papers and quizzed him on anatomy, until my own eyes burned with fatigue. I was the foundation upon which he would build his empire, the silent, invisible scaffolding holding him up. I never saw it as a transaction. It was a partnership, a joint venture into a brighter future. We were a team, moving toward a shared goal. When he finally graduated, magna cum laude, I cried harder than he did. His name was on the degree, but my soul was woven into the very fabric of it. We had done it. Or so I thought. The early years of his career were a blur of success, and for a time, they were glorious. He secured a coveted residency at a prestigious downtown hospital, then a fellowship, and finally, a position as a cardiothoracic surgeon. The money started pouring in, but for a while, it didn't change him, not truly. We celebrated every milestone together, often with simple dinners at our favorite Italian spot, the same one where he'd first said he loved me. I remember the night he signed his first big contract. He'd come home, eyes wide with a mix of exhaustion and elation, and swept me into a hug that left me breathless. "We did it, Grace," he'd whispered into my hair, pulling back to cup my face in his hands. "We did it. This is our future, our dream." We spent hours that night talking about everything we'd do, pay off our debts, buy a little house with a garden, and finally, my turn, my master's, my museum. He was still the Alex I loved, the earnest, grateful man who saw me as an equal partner. He'd bring me obscure art books from the hospital gift shop, or quietly leave me notes in my lunchbox, reminding me that soon, it would be my time. Our tiny apartment felt like a palace, filled with laughter and the shared anticipation of a life we were building together. Brick by brick, his successes felt like my own, a testament to our combined effort. But as the money truly began to flood in, so did the subtle shifts. Our tiny apartment became a sprawling modern house in a gated community, which he seemed to prefer I keep pristine, as if it were a museum display. His cheap college car became a sleek, black German sedan, but when I mentioned needing new tires for my old Civic, he just shrugged. "Oh, Grace, you barely drive. It's fine." My worn-out aprons were replaced with designer clothes he picked out for me. Elegant but impersonal, clothes that never quite felt like my own. He began introducing me at hospital galas as my wife, Grace, a polite afterthought, his eyes already scanning the room for someone more relevant. One evening, I remember admiring a large, abstract painting he'd just purchased for the living room. "It's quite striking, isn't it?" I commented, reaching out to trace a brushstroke. He chuckled, a low, patronizing sound. "It's a statement piece, Grace, not something to get overly sentimental about. It's meant to impress." It was the first time I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. The way he looked at me changed, too. It was no longer with adoration, or even simple affection, but with something that felt dangerously close to pity, as if I were a cherished but ultimately insignificant relic of a past life. The polite dismissal escalated into overt condescension. "You know, Grace, you should really think about doing something more with your life," he'd say over a dinner I'd spent hours preparing, not looking up from his tablet. "The hospital auxiliary is looking for volunteers. It would look good for us." He spoke of our life in terms of appearances, of strategy. Our love was no longer a partnership. It was a brand he had to manage, and I was, increasingly, off-brand. The laughter in our home grew less frequent, replaced by the hushed tones of his phone calls and the insistent tap of his fingers on a keyboard. He was always busy, always important. One afternoon, Sarah, my best friend from college who had gone on to become a brilliant lawyer, came over for coffee. She watched him leave for a conference, a trip he hadn't mentioned to me, with a skeptical eye. "He's changing, Grace," she'd said, stirring her espresso. "Not for the better. Have you noticed how he talks to you sometimes? Like you're a child, or a quaint little pet." I'd instantly bristled, defending him fiercely. "He's under a lot of pressure, Sarah. It's a demanding job. He's just preoccupied." But even as I said it, a part of me knew she was right, and a terrible fear began to gnaw at me. He started staying out late, the emergency surgeries texts becoming more frequent, hours after his shift was supposed to have ended. Then came the credit card statements I wasn't supposed to see, filled with charges for expensive jewelry I never received and lavish dinners at exclusive restaurants he'd never taken me to. He was building a second life, a secret life that didn't have room for a woman with calloused hands and a deferred dream. He was systematically erasing me, one careless transaction at a time. I tried to talk to him, to reach the man I married, but it was like talking to a brick wall built of polished arrogance. He'd just sigh, a long-suffering sound, and say, "You're being emotional, Grace. I'm busy. My work is important. You wouldn't understand." He made my contributions feel small, insignificant. The years I'd spent on my feet, the sleep I'd lost, the burning desire to go back to school that I'd suppressed for his sake. It all amounted to nothing in his new world of galas and groundbreaking medical procedures. He was the star, and I was just a dimly lit figure in the background of his magnificent story, fading further into the shadows with each passing day. The end came on our anniversary, our 10th. I'd booked a table at the small Italian restaurant where he'd first told me he loved me, hoping against hope that the familiar ambiance, the shared memories, could remind him of the people we used to be. He was an hour late. He didn't bring a gift or even a card. He sat down, loosened his tie, and looked at me with the cold, clinical assessment of a surgeon examining a tumor. He tried, I'll give him that. It was the last flicker of the man I knew. He asked about my day with a forced politeness that felt worse than silence. He ordered my favorite wine, but it felt like a calculated gesture, a box he needed to check before the execution. "Grace," he said, pushing his untouched pasta aside, "we need to talk. This isn't working." The floor fell out from under me. I asked him what he meant, though I already knew. I asked if there was someone else. He didn't even have the decency to lie. "Her name is Victoria. She's a biotech CEO. She understands my world, my pressures." "And what about my world?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "What about the sacrifices I made? The 6 years I worked 3 jobs so you could have this life, your world?" He laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh. It was sharp, dismissive. It was the sound of a guillotine blade falling. "What have you done? You punched a clock. You served coffee. That's not sacrifice. That's just having a job." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. This man, this stranger, in a $1,000 suit standing in for my husband, was systematically dismantling my entire life's value. I asked him why. Why now? Why like this? His answer shattered the last remaining piece of my heart. He leaned forward, his voice low and venomous, a chilling calm in his tone. "Because your simplicity disgusts me, Grace. The way you think, the way you dress, the way you live. I've outgrown you. You're not worthy of the life I've built." "You built?" I finally found my voice, laced with disbelief. You didn't build it alone. I'm the one with the MD. I'm the one saving lives, he sneered, his lip curling. Now, I'll have my lawyer send you the papers. I'll be generous. You'll be comfortable. He stood up, dropped $100 bill on the table, and walked out of the restaurant, leaving me alone with the ruins of our shared dream. My best friend Sarah, who had also become a brilliant lawyer while I was funding Alex's ascent, was incandescent with rage when I told her. She held me while I sobbed, the kind of deep, gut-wrenching grief that empties you out. When I was done, she looked at me with a fire in her eyes I hadn't seen in my own for years. We are not going to let him do this, Grace, she said, her voice firm, resolute. He is not going to invalidate you, not going to erase you. You have the truth, and the truth is powerful. We started digging. His initial divorce offer was insulting. A small lump sum and 2 years of minimal alimony, barely enough to live on. His legal team's argument was that I had made no direct financial investment in his education or career. They categorized my years of backbreaking labor as low-skilled jobs, minimally contributing to the household. Those words felt like slaps across my face, stinging and humiliating. Minimally contributing. The nights I'd stayed up massaging his aching shoulders after a 36-hour shift, the meals I'd cooked, the bills I'd paid, the life I had put on hold, all of it, reduced to a legal footnote. I felt a cold, hard anger begin to replace the grief. He didn't just want a divorce. He wanted to invalidate my entire existence, to rewrite our history and erase me from his story. One rainy afternoon, I was in the attic of our cold, empty house, packing his old belongings into boxes. I found a dusty crate labeled med school. Inside, buried beneath anatomy textbooks and faded notes, was a worn leather notebook. Tucked inside was a piece of paper, folded into a small square. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was a promissory note, written in his familiar scrawl on a napkin from our old coffee shop, dated 12 years ago. It said, I, Alex Pierce, promise to pay back my partner Grace for her full investment in my medical education, with lifelong interest, because she is betting everything on me. We had written it as a joke, a romantic gesture born of idealism and youthful hope, but he had signed it, and I had signed it as the lender. It was legally questionable, yes, but it was undeniable proof of his original intent, a binding testament to our initial agreement and the partnership we believed in. Beneath the notebook was a folder of old bank statements from my accounts during those 6 years. I had kept meticulous records. Every paycheck from the diner, the bar, the cleaning company, every deposit slip into his account labeled tuition or rent, every withdrawal to buy his books. It was a perfect, unbroken chain of evidence. I brought the box to Sarah's office, my hands still shaking with a mixture of vindication and disbelief. Sarah's eyes widened as she sifted through the documents. Grace, this is extraordinary, she murmured, her lawyer's brain already whirring. The napkin might be a long shot on its own, but combined with these records, it's a powerful statement of intent, proof of your financial contributions, and his acknowledgement of them. She immediately brought in her forensic accountants, a sharp, quiet team, who vanished into a mountain of ledgers and digital files. A week later, Sarah called me, her voice tight with professional triumph. They found it all, Grace. The offshore accounts, the shell companies, the business investments that were actually just cash transfers to Victoria's company. He bought her a new car, paid for a lavish trip to Monaco, even funded a large portion of her startup with what should have been marital assets. He wasn't just leaving you. He was actively looting our shared life to fund his new one. The details made my stomach clench, a fresh wave of betrayal washing over me, but it also solidified my resolve. Before the final hearing, my mother called me. She was worried. Honey, are you sure about this? She asked, her voice laced with concern. He's a powerful man. He has so much money for lawyers. Maybe you should just take his offer and start over. All this fighting, it's not good for your soul. You don't want to become bitter. For a moment I wavered. Was she right? Was I just dragging this out for revenge? The thought made me feel sick, a chilling fog of doubt creeping in. Was I becoming as cold and calculating as he was, sacrificing my peace for retribution? Maybe starting over quietly was the more dignified path, less messy, less painful. But then I looked at the box of evidence on my floor, the years of my life meticulously documented. This wasn't about revenge in the way my mother understood it. It was about the truth. It was about the 19-year-old girl who gave up everything for a boy's promise. The girl whose dreams were systematically stripped away. I couldn't let him erase her. I couldn't let him win by default. By making me disappear, my resolve hardened. This was about reclaiming my narrative, my worth. Which brings us back to the courtroom. The air was thick with tension, heavy with unspoken accusations and veiled contempt. Alex's lawyer, a smug man in a suit that cost more than my car, had just finished his closing statement. Mrs. Pierce was a supportive spouse, yes, but let's be clear, he said, gesturing toward me dismissively, as if I were a mere footnote. Support does not equal investment. She held low-skilled jobs, contributing minimally to the household while my client pursued his demanding, and ultimately, very lucrative education and career. Something inside me cracked when I heard those words, a sharp internal snap. 6 years. 6 years of my life, my youth, my dreams, reduced to a dismissive wave of a hand. Nothing of value. Sarah stood, her posture radiating quiet power. Your Honor, we have one final piece of evidence to submit. She walked to the clerk and handed over the sealed manila envelope. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes, took it. She sliced it open with a letter opener, her face impassive. Alex whispered something to his lawyer, and they both chuckled softly, a patronizing sound that grated on my nerves. They thought it was a desperate, last-ditch effort, a sign of our weakness. The judge pulled out the contents. First, the stack of my old bank statements, neatly clipped together. Then, the forensic accountant's report on his hidden assets. And last, the small folded napkin. The judge's expression began to change. Her eyebrows rose slightly as she scanned the bank records. Her lips tightened almost imperceptibly as she read the accountant's summary. Then she unfolded the napkin. She read the handwritten words, and a strange thing happened. A slow, knowing smile spread across the judge's face, a silent acknowledgement that spoke volumes. It wasn't a polite chuckle, but a deep, genuine appreciation for the audacious, almost poetic nature of the evidence, a quiet understanding of the story it told. Alex's smirk vanished, his face clouded with confusion. His lawyer leaned forward, his own confidence visibly faltering, a flicker of panic in his eyes. They had no idea what was happening. But sitting there, watching his certainty dissolve into pure panic, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt powerful. The judge finally composed herself. Though her eyes still held a spark of knowing amusement, she looked directly at Alex. Mr. Pierce, she said, her voice cutting through the tension with the precision of a scalpel. Your lawyer has argued that your wife made no direct financial investment. Yet I have here bank statements detailing 6 years of consistent deposits from 3 separate employers into your personal account, totaling, if my math is correct, just over $93,000. This is a clear financial contribution directly supporting your education and living expenses. Alex went pale, a sickly greenish tint creeping over his face. His lawyer started to stand, a frantic protest forming on his lips, but the judge held up a hand, silencing him with a firm, unyielding gesture. I also have a fascinating report on several business investments you've made in the last 2 years, including a $75,000 wire transfer to a Miss Victoria Stanton. Can you explain that, Mr. Pierce? Alex stammered, his voice thin. That was a legitimate loan for her startup, Your Honor. A loan with no paperwork, no repayment schedule, and no interest? The judge asked, her tone dry, laced with palpable disbelief. How very generous of you, Mr. Pierce, especially when contrasted with your current stance regarding your marital assets. She then held up the napkin, unfolding it carefully. But this is particularly illuminating. I promise to pay back my partner Grace for her full investment with lifelong interest. Is this your signature, Mr. Pierce? He looked at the napkin, then at me, a flicker of pure hatred in his eyes. He knew he was trapped, exposed. We were kids, he mumbled, his voice barely audible. It was a joke. A joke? The judge's voice lost all its amusement. It became as cold and sharp as the medical instruments he wielded. You didn't think it was a joke when you cashed her paychecks, did you? You didn't think it was a joke when she was cleaning toilets at 4 a.m. so you could get a full night's sleep before an exam? This court views this not as a joke, but as a written acknowledgement of a partnership, a clear intent to reciprocate a substantial financial and personal investment. She leaned forward, her eyes boring into him, unflinching. Mr. Pierce, your arrogance and your subsequent attempt to rewrite history are breathtaking. As I watched him shrink under the judge's gaze, a part of me felt a sharp, unexpected pang of sadness. I remembered the boy who wrote that note on the napkin, the earnest, ambitious boy who held my hand and swore we were a team, who looked at me with adoration and shared dreams. Where did he go? For a brief second, I felt a wave of guilt, a whisper of what if. Was this justice, or was it just destruction? Was I merely reveling in his downfall? The thought was uncomfortable, cold, but then I saw his face, twisted not with remorse, not with a flicker of recognition for the person I once was to him, but with the raw, self-serving fury of a king being dethroned, and in that moment, I knew that boy was gone forever. This man, this hollowed-out stranger, deserved this. This wasn't about revenge. It was about acknowledging the truth of our past and the profound imbalance he had created. The judge laid the papers down and folded her hands, her ruling already decided, her expression unyielding. She looked from Alex to me, and her expression softened for a fraction of a second, a moment of empathetic understanding. Success built on someone else's sacrifice isn't yours alone. It's a debt. Every hour she worked, every dollar she earned, every dream she gave up, that is the foundation of the career you hold so dear. You owe her everything, and you gave her nothing but contempt. She turned her steely gaze back to Alex, her voice resonating through the silent courtroom. Therefore, this court is awarding Mrs. Pierce 50% of all marital assets, including the funds you attempted to hide through illicit transfers. We are also classifying the $93,000 she paid for your education as a direct investment, which has appreciated in value alongside your career. By my calculation, your wife walks away with approximately $450,000, plus ongoing spousal support for the next 4 years, to allow her to complete the education she forfeited for you. You, Mr. Pierce, walk away with a lesson. In the gallery, I saw Victoria stand up abruptly, her face a mask of rage and disbelief. She stormed out of the courtroom, the heavy door slamming shut behind her. The sound of Alex's lawyer frantically whispering to him was drowned out by the blood rushing in my ears. It was over. Justice hadn't just been served, it had been delivered with a crushing, undeniable finality, a testament to the power of a truth that had been buried for too long. I felt Sarah's hand squeeze my shoulder, her silent comfort a balm. I looked over at Alex. He was just sitting there, staring into space, a hollowed-out man whose carefully constructed world had imploded, not because of me, but because he refused to acknowledge the one person who had given him everything. 6 months later, I was sitting in a college classroom. The afternoon sun streamed through the large windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The professor was lecturing on the socio-economic impact of Renaissance art patronage, and I was taking notes, my pen flying across the page, absorbing every word with a hunger I hadn't felt in years. My phone buzzed in my bag. It was a text from Sarah. Saw Alex's house is on the market. Also heard Victoria left him the day after the verdict. Hope you're well. I smiled faintly, typed back, couldn't be better, and put the phone away. I looked around the lecture hall, at the young, eager faces, at the professor's passionate gestures, and I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. I thought back to that day in the courtroom, to the look on Alex's face as his world crumbled, and as I tried to summon the memory, to evoke the sting of betrayal or the thrill of victory, I realized something remarkable. I felt nothing. No pain, no bitterness, no smug satisfaction, no longing for what we used to have, just peace. Just freedom. The rage had burned itself out, leaving behind clean, open ground, ready for new growth. They say success is the best revenge, but they're wrong. Peace is the best revenge. The quiet, unshakable knowledge that my worth was never tied to his approval, that my value was not determined by the man I stood beside. He had tried to make me a footnote in his story, but now he was nothing more than a closed chapter in mine. I spent 6 years building someone else's dream, Now it was finally time to build my own.